All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining our program tonight, Gardening Opportunities in Our Changing Climate. The goal of this program that Charlotte and I have created for you is to help you grow resilient gardens during times of excessive weather. So, something that, well, Charlotte, do you want to add anything? There's a little note here that you added about by simply increasing the health of your soil, you can reduce a lot of the pest problems and grow healthier plants during these times of excessive rains and excessive heat.
Yep. And we'll talk about how healthy soil is integral into that resilience that you talked about.
Yeah. All right. So we're really excited to share with you everything we know to help you grow a resilient garden. So let's get started. Okay, so tonight's sponsor is the Alameda County-wide Clean Water Program that works to protect Alameda County creeks, wetlands, and the bay from runoff that might carry pollutants into the waterways. So related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off our lawn and garden, washed off our yards and into the storm drains by irrigation and rain. You can learn more about the Alameda County-wide Clean Water Program on their website, cleanwaterprogram.org. You can also sign up for the Clean Water News on their website to receive updates about events and other programming such as this. It comes straight to your email and it is going to be on their website, thecleanwaterprogram.org. You can watch previous programs that we've presented, such as gardening for pollinators, building healthy soils, an eco-friendly approach to growing roses, and more at the Clean Water Program Alameda County YouTube channel. So it's backwards. Clean Water Program Alameda County or Alameda County-wide. And that's what I type in on the YouTube channel. And all of our past programming comes up, as well as this program. This recording will be there in the coming days. So we're going to go through slides for a good solid hour. We're going to leave time for your questions at the end. However, please drop your questions into the Q&A as they come up. Charlotte and I will provide you with those answers. If it's really quick, one of us might type it in, but really we will address your questions at the end of our program. What we're going to review this evening is an introduction to the Our Water, Our World program for those of you that are not familiar with it. And we're going to touch on what integrated pest management is, since that is what we teach. We are going to talk about how climate change and weather affects the landscape and how that is related to pest management. We are going to dive into a lot of detail about how to grow resilient gardens, and then share tools to protect our plants from extreme conditions. So Our Water, Our World is a national award-winning clean water program. Our Water, Our World, or OWOW. OWOW's goal is to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, explaining that the products that we use around our home or our gardens can end up polluting our local waterways. So we partner with water pollution prevention agencies and retailers that sell pesticides. We provide integrated pest management education, or IPM education, to both the retailer, the associates that work in the stores, and to the public. We provide this education around less toxic pest management and how to grow healthy gardens in a way that's not toxic for the waterways. You can learn more about the Our Water, Our World program at ourwaterourworld.org. Now, watersheds are gardens and water quality. How is this all related? So, real quick review on a watershed. It is the area of land that drains or sheds water into a single body of water. So watersheds drain any rainwater or snow melt that isn't absorbed into the ground into a stream, a creek, a river that might flow to a lake or a reservoir, estuaries, a marsh, bay and eventually the ocean. In urban areas and around our gardens, all of that water that isn't absorbed into the ground is going to run off into a local storm drain that goes untreated to the nearest waterway or seasonal creek. It can also just go into a seasonal creek by passing that storm drain, but taking with it any chemicals, pet waste, motor oil, debris, fertilizers, any residuals from pesticides and other chemicals, anything that we've used out there around our properties that's out there in the environment actually can get picked up and moved with this urban runoff into the waterways. So as I mentioned, Our Water, Our World is a program designed to draw that connection between pollutants and water quality. So we provide education around less toxic pest management and how to grow those healthy gardens in a way that won't pollute our water or the environment. And as I mentioned, we teach IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. This is the big part of how to keep our gardens healthy and how to keep our homes secure from pests. So through integrated pest management, or IPM, it allows us really to address the cause, to really look a little deeper to see what is that problem, what is really going on. Oftentimes what we see are symptoms of a problem. We use science-based strategies, and then through the lens of IPM, we look at the home and garden as a whole system to see what is actually going on. Proper identification is key. If we cannot identify that pest, it is going to be really difficult to solve that problem and to prevent that pest from happening again. So then from there, we determine what that pest is, and then what is our threshold of tolerance? Is this something we can live with, or is this a seasonal pest that is just going to go away on its own, not causing that much damage, but maybe is just a nuisance? If we need to take action, the action steps in IPM are referred to as controls: cultural controls, which is bolstering the health of the environment; mechanical controls are the tools we use to solve that pest problem; biological controls are inviting in living organisms like beneficial insects to manage those pest problems; cultural controls are going to be the pesticides. We're always going to use them as a last resort. When we've exercised the other controls, we're always going to use the least toxic product available. In the program that we've prepared for you this evening, our focus is going to be on those cultural controls. So let's dive in. So many months gardening in California. Under normal conditions, we here in California, we live in a Mediterranean climate. So there are many months of little precipitation. Those are going to be the summer months. That's normal for Alameda County and most of California. And we can expect to get our rainfall during the winter months, starting as early as October and really going as late as April, maybe even May. So we just recently got some rain, which is pretty great, and I'm not sure if we're going to get more rain this year. I would like to, but it's hard to say. However, during the past several years of extreme weather events, such as excessive heat, triple-digit temperatures over a period of a few days or weeks in parts of the county that are not accustomed to triple digits, and extreme rain events, such as atmospheric rivers that lead to flooding, these are all now normal and to be expected, which is funny. So we want to talk a little bit about what happens to plants during these events. I'm going to start by talking about how plants react to heat and prolong periods of extreme heat. So what happens during times of heat, the plants, the intense heat, actually, the stresses of the heat will inhibit the plant's photosynthesis process. So the plants will be unable to photosynthesize fully or correctly. So during those times of heat, the plants are going to close their stomata or the little pores that are on those leaves to preserve any moisture, to really lock in any moisture that they have. They don't want any of that moisture to evaporate out. But this also stops and slows the process of photosynthesis. So then that plant is unable to feed itself or to uh, turn those sugars into those carbohydrates to feed itself. So the plants will look wilted. Sometimes over a long period, the stresses last too long. The plants can actually be starved because they won't be able to create more food for itself. Something to keep in mind, though, is plants that are overwatered oftentimes can also look wilted. So it's always really important just to be sure, just to check the soil. And even sometimes plants that are just newly established or haven't become fully established, even though they are properly hydrated at their root zone, they're still closing those stomata to lock in that moisture, so they could look wilted. So the point is they could look wilted when they don't need any moisture or additional moisture around the root zone. Water stressed plants can have symptoms that resemble disease caused by plant pathogens. So water stressed plants, uh, they can be affected by periods of drought, could be these plants that are drought stressed can then be susceptible to disease because they're stressed, opening the way for pathogens to infect that plant when it's not at its healthiest state. So, yes, we'll continue. Okay, so what do we see during times of excessive heat? We can see different types of sunburn or sun scald on leaves and on bark and on branches. We can see leaf drop, tip dieback, bark split, decoloration, among other things. So leaves damaged by heat can also mistakenly look like pest damage. For instance, the sunburn on the orchid leaf that's on the top right corner, the inside of that tissue will deteriorate, will drop out, and that burnt tissue creates a hole in the leaf, which could be mistaken for snail or slug damage. Other systems due to excessive heat could be mistaken for disease that attack the plant's root and vascular system, like armillaria root rot or verticillium wilt. If your plants do get burned, do not prune out that sun damage. We want to keep those leaves on the plant, let them drop naturally, because those leaves are going to continue to shade out the other leaves underneath it and help that tree and protect it from that sun. All right, some other common garden pests that thrive during periods of hot and dry are spider mites, whiteflies, powdery mildew, bark beetles, and tree borers. So a couple things to keep in mind is if it is an insect like the whitefly or spider mites, it's always important to, or a good idea to put some sticky traps out to monitor their activity. We are going to gently prune your plant to increase the airflow. Of course, when the temperatures have cooled down, not during those excessive heat periods. And we're also going to monitor. Really monitoring for these pests is the best defense against to protect our plants. All right, now let's look at how our landscapes react during excessive rains. So during excessive rains, when that soil is wet, we want to avoid walking on wet soil because this can compact that soil. And Charlotte's going to share in a moment how we want to, make that soil as healthy as possible so that water can infiltrate. So we want to avoid walking on wet soil. We want to avoid mowing those areas because, the weeds come when the rains come. And if that soil is too wet and we're mowing, we want to really wait till that soil has dried out quite a bit. We really want to avoid working or walking on that soil. We want to avoid parking cars or equipment on that wet soil also because we want to avoid compaction. But also keep in mind that cars or equipment could get stuck in that wet soil, and that is something that happens to many people I know, including myself. We also want to note areas of standing water. This is really important because during the dry season, such as a couple months from now, things are still not quite dry. We can install drainage systems like a French drain so that we can avoid that next season or the next time it rains. We want to avoid fertilizing during times of rain because it will wash away. We want to avoid applying pesticides when rain is in the forecast of 48 hours. It is very important if we're doing like a dormant application of like a copper or horticultural oil that it can dry completely before the rain comes. So that's why it's really nice 48 hours before a rain is in the forecast. We want to avoid pruning during wet conditions unless necessary, like if there is a limb or something that is to threat to falling on a structure. We want to avoid during wet conditions because this can lead to pathogens settling into the branch tissue. Pruning deciduous fruit trees and roses is advised to do when there is no rain in the forecast for several days. We want that all those cuts to heal over nicely. And then we want to make sure potted plants have good drainage and are not sitting in saucers full of water. And then the pests that we will see more of during wet conditions are going to be slugs and snails. They absolutely love the cool, wet conditions. So things we can do are make a snail board, which is a trap that will capture snails underneath it, and then we can scrape those off into vessel to get rid of them, or we can use snail baits like iron phosphate. Those are excellent. Earwigs, ants, and cockroaches, we will see more of them trying to enter the home because it's nice and dry and warm inside our homes. So we want to seal up those cracks and crevices with a fresh bead of caulk or add weather stripping and door sweeps to seal off those points of entry. Weeds, as I mentioned, the weeds arrive when the rains arrive. And so we want to, employ mulch and maybe sheet mulching the cardboard with a nice 3-inch layer of wood chips on top. That's going to prevent those weeds. And then we're going to mow those weeds when that soil has dried. Mushrooms are going to pop up. We can remove those by hand, just put some gloves on and put them in our green waste bin. Mosquitoes. We want to empty any pots or saucers or tarps or baskets or anything that might be holding water. We want to make sure we pour those vessels out because mosquitoes can breed very quickly. And then how to distinguish plant biotic factors from abiotic disorders. So a biotic factor is a damage done by a living organism. So for us gardeners, that's going to be damage to plants caused by pests such as slugs and snails, earwigs or aphids, or fungal diseases like black spot, rust, peach leaf curl, and so forth. Abiotic factors refer to non-living physical and chemical elements within that ecosystem that cause the damage, such as water, light, heat, cold, wind, other chemicals and minerals. So that could be like frost or that sunburn or, water not draining, rotting roots, things like that. So how do we distinguish the causes of the problems? Because sometimes they look very similar. We want to identify that host plant, including the cultivar. And then from there, we can determine if that plant is prone to a certain pest that has the symptoms that we're seeing. We also want to examine the environmental conditions to see if this is only on this plant or this host or this cultivar, or is it crossing different species? Are other plants in the area also affected? What are the symptoms over time? So this will really help you determine if it is an environmental factor or if it is truly a pest.
On that note, I helped a customer recently who brought in some leaves on their rose bushes that looked like they were being eaten, but like you could hold them up and like it was more ripped than eaten. I was like, I think they're just wind damaged. And it turns out there was like a tree above them that drops a lot of stuff. So I was like, it's probably just wind damage. It was really, really windy for like the last 2 days. So I think that was the problem. But that's one of those tricky things where you don't know. So it's good to look at all the symptoms. Okay, so thank you, Suzanne, for sharing all of the potential problems that can arise from our erratic weather patterns that we're seeing now. So now we're going to talk about how to really help our gardens continue to be strong and resilient through those major swings or big weather events. We are going to focus on building healthy soil, supporting the life in the soil and protecting the soil and why that's important. We're going to water deeply and at the root zone. And we'll show you how to do that and why that's important. We're going to utilize tools to maximize efficiency and protect our plants, especially in times of heat. We're going to choose appropriate plants for our gardens, ones that will withstand this. It's hard for all plants to withstand the crazy things that we're experiencing now, but there are some that are going to be better suited. And then we're going to support our ecosystem and retain that rain because we honestly never know when we're going to get it again. So we got to hold on to it. All right, so step one is building healthy soil. And what does healthy soil look like? Just to define it for you all, it has high levels of organic matter. It's living. There's fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates moving throughout it. There's good water infiltration, which means that water, rain, or irrigation that hits that soil, it's going to enter that soil pretty quickly and not pool. It has a high water holding capacity, which means that it holds on to water longer. So your healthy soil is really a sponge. So you can imagine, pouring water onto a dry sponge, it quickly rehydrates and then it holds that water there. That's what we want our soil to be like. Well, we never want it to be super dry, but that's the idea. We want it to be able to absorb and hold onto water easily. Healthy soil also can filter out toxins, like from that urban runoff that all the material that is out in the world might end up on our gardens somehow. This healthy soil can actually act like as a Brita filter for those toxins and lock them into the soil and allow the water that moves through down to the groundwater to be nice and clean. Healthy soil, again, it's alive, so it delivers nutrients and water to the plants when they need it. And when you have healthy soil, you don't require as many chemical fertilizers or pesticides because you have healthier plants. And just to really nail that, the connection between soil health and water is so important both in drought and flooding. Or periods of heavy rain, because again, we want our soil to be able to absorb water quickly so that it doesn't pool like in this picture and it doesn't run off into the street where it could pull chemicals or debris or soil or mulch away from our yards and rush it down the storm drain. We want as much water to stay on the soil where it hits it so that we can really store the water in the soil. So again, good soil structure means good water infiltration. Water soaks in easily, and it doesn't cause too much pooling or any pooling. It doesn't wash off, and then it settles into the soil and is held there like a sponge for long periods of time, so that, it can absorb that water in the winter and then hold on to it for those summer months when the plants are going to need it. And the best way to turn your soil into a sponge is to add compost. And of course, you can make your own. You can buy some wonderful compost from a garden center or hardware store. But adding compost is really doing all of those things that we already talked about what is, creates that healthy soil. It adds nutrients, it adds life, it turns your soil into the sponge. So what it's doing, compost is improving the soil structure, which makes it that spongy quality, because it glues particles together so that it can hold water longer. And by that gluing, it also creates pores so that water can get in much easier instead of just like a flat, clay, compact, yard you're having, it's going to break up and create more pores so that the water can get in there. Compost can increase the microbiology, that life in the soil. It balances pH levels. It uses nutrients from other, food and garden waste. And it also helps, again, to reduce the need for fertilizers and pesticides because you're creating healthy plants. There's a few ways to add compost to your soil. Mix it into existing soil, like amending a bed before you plant. Top dress around the drip line of plants, so the outer edge, the root zone of plants, just put it on top of the soil, especially if you have like perennials or trees. You don't want to disrupt the soil too much. Or you can make a compost tea, which is kind of what it sounds like. Compost in water soaked, and then filtering it out and using that water as kind of a liquid fertilizer. And I just want to share how important the life in the soil is, and really how we're actually like gardening for the life in the soil. We're not just growing plants, we're growing soil microorganisms. And I'm talking about bacteria, fungi, invertebrates, not just worms, but worms are very important as well. But basically, plants can't live without this life in the soil. All that life in the soil creates what's called a rhizosphere around each plant root, like a little, just a little area around the root. And in that area, the life, the microbiology is kind of taking the nutrients from the soil, from the organic matter, the leaf litter, the compost, the dead roots and plant material, and turning it into food that the plant can absorb. Plants can't just, their roots can't just suck up organic material in the soil on their own. They need that bacteria and fungi to kind of process it and turn it into plant available form. Same exact thing happens in our gut. We eat food. The microbiome in our stomachs turns that food into nutrients that we can absorb. And then I just wanted to share that picture on the left is kind of a picture of I think it's a tomato plant, or what, it doesn't matter what kind of plant it is, but there's roots, and then there's these white wispy things coming off of the roots. Those are the mycorrhizal fungi, which can be found all over the world in lots of different kinds of soil. That fungi is so important for building that healthy soil, delivering nutrients from far away, delivering water from far away. They kind of act like root extenders. And so anything we can do to nurture that life is going to be really helpful for our plants. And we'll talk about more ways to do that. So another way to do that, add nutrients to the soil in the form of organic fertilizers. So compost is wonderful, but sometimes certain plants might need fertilizer as well. And there's a few different ways to add it, in a granular form, in a liquid form, kelp, guano, lots of kinds of things. It's made out of a lot of different material, mushrooms, manure, compost, bone meal, blood meal, and it contains micronutrients as well, not just the basic nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It also contains boron and calcium and magnesium and all kinds of other micronutrients because it's sourced from a diverse sources. And organic fertilizer is really wonderful because it's released slowly to your plants. It works with the natural systems that are in the soil. So when you're adding it to the soil, you're actually feeding those microbes, and then the microbes are taking it and feeding the plant what the plant needs when it wants it. Oops. And then just a couple of differences between using synthetic fertilizers and organic fertilizers. I will share when you are looking at the fertilizers in the store, organic is pretty clear. It will say organic, or it'll have some sort of certification listed on it, OMRI, or some sort of symbol that'll say like certified organic. So look for those wording or symbols. And if it doesn't have it, there's probably at least some ingredients in it that may be from synthetic sources, which are usually from fossil fuels. So synthetic fertilizers kind of bypass that soil microbiology and feed the plant directly, which sounds good. It's fast, it's efficient, but it really causes the plant to become dependent on those nutrients. And so if you go out of town or skip a feeding or something happens, that plant is going to really suffer. Whereas organic fertilizer, again, you're just adding that nutrients to the soil, and the nutrients is available to your plants whenever, even if you do go out of town. And I will share, and then synthetic fertilizers stimulate rapid growth, which again sounds good, but rapid growth stresses plants out and invites pests. Pests love a stressed out plant with a lot of new growth on it. So those two together can really cause more pest problems. Whereas organic fertilizer is making for hardier, maybe slower growth. And then lastly, I'll just say synthetic fertilizer is high in salts. So over time, it can build up when you're in the soil. It can potentially harm the soil, the waterways, and make it problematic for your plants in the soil as well. Some other ways we can build healthy soil and really nurture the life in the soil is by keeping our soil covered. Now there is an asterisk on that. Soil likes to be covered. It helps protect the soil, helps the soil structure. It keeps, covered soil is not going to move away with rain and wind as much, but we do want to keep a little bit of a section of our yards bare or wild, I guess, because we do want to support the native ground-dwelling bees. That is really important to give them a place to nest in the ground. But the rest of your yard could be focused on covering that soil. So one great way to cover your soil is with cover crops. And this is a great way, especially in like veggie beds that you're between seasons, or you're not currently growing in. Cover crops are just crops that we put in the ground to really nurture the soil. We're really growing soil with these crops. We're not growing like something we can eat. And they hold the soil in place so that the roots in the soil hold it in place so that when we do get wind or rain or some sort of storms, that soil is being held there and it's not moving away. And then it's also shading out the soil so that the sun beating down on it is not, going to dry it out. Other benefits of cover crops are feeding the soil microbes. Any kind of growing root in the soil is going to be helpful for that life in the soil. Some cover crops like legumes, like fava beans, can replenish nitrogen in the soil. They provide food for beneficial insects throughout the year, the beautiful flowers that they grow. And of course, overall, they improve the soil structure and water holding capacity. And then another way to protect soil is using mulch. Now, we recommend using an organic mulch. It doesn't have to be, so it could be wood, bark, or like wood chips or bark, but it also could be straw. Some people use newspaper or leaves. Really, mulch is anything covering the soil to protect it. I don't recommend as much gravel or oyster shells, things made out of or inorganic materials. They just don't provide, they do cover the soil, but they don't provide as many benefits as an organic mulch does. So an organic mulch like wood chips or bark will cover the soil, so then the soil stays in place, doesn't blow away, isn't, baked in the sun. It reduces evaporation. It's a little protective blanket on the soil, so the water that's in the soil stays in there longer. It regulates soil temperatures, which is so important when we're getting these long, stretches of heat and then maybe a cold snap. We want the soil temperatures to kind of stay even so that the roots aren't feeling those major swings. So that mulch is kind of like an insulation blanket, and it helps us to prevent soil compaction and erosion, so we can walk on the mulchy areas. It provides a nice little bouncy protection, so we're not compacting the soil. Of course, it also prevents weed germination, feeds the soil, and provides habitat for beneficial insects as well. We always want to keep mulch away from plant stems, though. When we put it all right up against the plant, that can invite pest problems and disease.
Now I get to talk about watering and irrigation, which is one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to review where to direct the water, how long to water for, how frequently we should water our plants, and a few tips on using irrigation systems. So when we water, we have a new plant. We've planted that plant in the ground to address some of the questions that came up in the poll. It could take a year for some perennials to become established, including natives. It could take up to 3 years for some shrubs to become established, including natives. It could take, if it's a large shrub, it could take maybe 5 years. If it's a small tree or a large tree, it could take anywhere from 5 to 8 years for the trees to become established. So really depending on what that plant material is, it could take some time for it to become established. During that time, we are going to monitor how we water that root zone, because we want to grow deep, broad roots in that beautiful soil we've just cultivated. And we do that by watering deeply and by watering, pulling roots out. And we do that by bringing water out as those roots grow. We want to avoid watering shallowly, because when we grow water shallowly, we grow a shallow root zone. When we have a hot, dry day, that water evaporates out quickly, and then that root zone will dry out. If the irrigation isn't set to come on for a couple more days, or if we don't think to water for a couple more days, then that plant becomes stressed. Stressed plants are going to be more prone to pest problems and will show decline earlier than healthy plants. So when we water, we want to water deeply, so that we can grow deeper roots. Okay. During the time of excessive heat or an irrigation breaks, that soil might dry out, but there's still going, the top few inches might dry out, but there'll still be moisture down at the deeper parts of the root zone, which it's going to be its insurance. Of course, buy us some time until we can fix it or till that heat passes. But we also want to always focus the water at the drip line. In the top illustration, the top right illustration, we see those root hairs. Okay, that's where we're going to focus the watering and when we feed the plant. Okay, so when we water our plants, our goal is to get that water about, let's just say, depending on the plant material, 6 to 12 inches deep. This is on plants that are established. Okay, the depth is going to depend on the plant material. So established perennials, we might want to drive water about 6 inches or so down, of course, depending on the species and the plant material. Whereas larger shrubs or trees, we might want to drive that water and get it water long enough so that water can get about 12 inches or so. Of course, this is just a very broad suggestion, and it is going to depend on the plant material and how those root zones are when they are mature, when they are established. Okay. So the water is still going to move beyond those depths, but that's our goal. Okay. So and then we're not going to water again until the top few inches of that soil has dried out. Again, if it's a plant like some of our California natives that prefer to really dry out before it gets watered again, or a plant that prefers to have their soil around the root zone evenly moist, we might need to water it more frequently. So those are just some things to understand the plant material you have and what its water needs are once it's established. And what as that plant becomes established, we are cultivating a nice healthy root zone. Okay, trees. Trees are the priority during times of drought. They have a very large, intricate root system and they provide more of an ecosystem service to us by carbon sequestration and providing a shade and habitat for a lot of the wildlife, including the birds and butterflies and so many other species that enjoy trees. Okay, please consult with a licensed arborist to see if it is necessary to provide a deep soak during the late summer months of July, August, and September. This might only be one time. This might be once a month. This might be, more. But what I'm sharing is that July, August, and September are our hottest, driest months, and it could be important to keep your tree healthy to provide some additional watering. But you will need to consult with a ISA arborist, please. That is very important. Okay, a couple notes on irrigation systems. For those of us that have irrigation systems, they still might be off. I haven't turned mine on yet, but when we turn them on, it's important to flush the system and to inspect the system for clogs and leaks. It's not unusual for spiders to get into those emitters, make a little home, clog up that emitter, but just inspect your system. If you need some support, you can go to your local irrigation supply store, like the Urban Farmer or Ewing or Horizon, and they can give you some tips on it. We want to adjust those controllers for the new season. Just because we had it set for fall, it might not be appropriate for right now. So these are not set and forget systems. We want to make sure that irrigation is set for what's going on right now with the new season. The best time to water is going to be during those sunrise hours. So I always like to say between 4 and maybe 7 a.m. We want to avoid evening watering because it attracts pests such as slugs and snails, earwigs, rodents, especially in the summertime, and other wildlife like raccoons will gnaw on those emitters. But it could also cause some plant diseases like black spot and rust. If we have pop-up sprays or sprinklers, it's really nice to consider converting those to drip, because when we have drip irrigation, it targets the water to the root zone and reduces any of the evaporation that might occur with the sprinkler systems. Check for smart controller and switch to drip rebates with your local water supplier because those are available. And what is the most efficient way to water? It might work, it might be an irrigation system, though it's not necessary. So just something to consider. Hand watering can be efficient too, but it might not be as easy or as effective. It just depends. There's a lot of options. If we are going to use drip, there's lots of options for drips, how that water gets delivered out into the garden. There's the different types of emitters you want to keep in mind. Not only are there all of, these types that are mentioned here, but also maybe some are the traditional ones or the ones that I am accustomed to working with. The photo on the left is an emitter coming out of the end of 1/4-inch tubing or spaghetti tubing. This might be on a long tubing that we can adjust around the plant. It could go around like a drip line or can go along a row of veggies and so forth. Whereas on the right, that 1/2-inch PE tubing, it can either just come as tubing where we're plugging in that spaghetti tubing, Or it can also come where there's emitters within that tubing spaced like maybe 6, 12, or 18 inches. So just keep in mind there's a lot of different types of ways to deliver water to the garden. But with all the different emitters, there's also different flow rates. There is no standard among the different brands. So the most common is going to be a 1 gallon per hour flow rate. However, it's really important for you to know what the flow rate is. If your gardener set up your irrigation, or you moved into the place and the irrigation was set up and you have no idea, then you want to actually measure how much water is coming out of that emitter during a period of time so you can understand if it's a 1 gallon per hour or 2 gallon per hour or even a half-gallon per hour, because this is going to help you understand what is the appropriate volume of water that plant needs and how long that irrigation system needs to be running for. We absolutely do not want to water the crown of the plants. So when irrigation is set up at the base or the crown of the plant, this actually can reduce the lifespan of that plant significantly. So we always want to make sure we're watering at the outer edges. And, the question that comes up a lot is, how much water do I need to deliver? Well, we are unable to tell you how much water how often you need to water or for how long. You need to actually inspect the soil and determine for yourself, depending on what is the texture of your soil, or if there's a nice 2-inch layer of mulch on top, or if those plants are newly planted, or are they established, or is there like a wind that comes through in the afternoon, or is it shaded from the house at some point? There are so many factors that could depend on how quickly that water evaporates out of the soil. So it's just really important for you to feel that soil, get your fingers in that soil. And something else to share is that a lot of, well, depending on the type of soil medium we've added, or if it's potting soil in a container, sometimes the different materials, such as like if there's a lot of peat moss or coconut coir, it actually could take a little bit of time for that water to hydrate. So, though you might feel like you've really been watering that soil for a long time, or that you have your irrigation set up properly, just go around and check, because take it from me, a professional gardener. I like to call myself a professional. I've been doing this for a long time. I still get tricked. So I will have to put my finger in that soil to make sure. And if I'm new to a property, I'm going to check every single time I water. And then after I've checked a few times, then I'm going to get the hang of it. I'm going to understand how water is moving through different areas of the garden, and then I can dial it in. So just become a little bit more familiar with your soil and how water is moving through it. We're going to protect our plants from sun and heat. Um, of course, the best sun and heat protection is healthy, deep watering of that soil, but additional shade cloth can be used to protect the plants from the hot sun. Here in California, we have hot sun. Even though our plants might love that full hot sun, during those times of excessive heat, they need a little bit of shade, especially if that heat's coming out of nowhere. It's kind of like us going out and getting some sunburn without sunscreen on. So shade cloth should always be tented over the plants, not laid right on top. We always want that airflow to occur. And the shade cloth should be designed in a way that it can get rolled off or rolled back down. Really, the best shade for a garden is going to be maybe a 30 to 50% shade. That is going to be ideal for most food crops and most plants. If a tree has been removed and a shade garden is now full sun, you're going to look at something that's 75 or 80% shade, keeping in mind that 90% is usually the best for us. And then we want to consider protecting the trunks of young trees or newly planted trees with a horticultural paint or a tree paint. Ivy Organics is a brand that you can purchase, and one of their products even has rodent prevention. So that's kind of cool. But really what we're doing is we're going to use just latex paint, any light color. We're going to mix it 50-50 with water and paint that on from the bottom of the trunk up to where the branches start to split, or like the crotch of that plant, because the canopy will be able to shade the leaves, and the canopy will be able to shade those branches the top part of the tree, no problem. And then something else that's kind of cool that I feel like is underutilized in the industry. These are some products that you might want to consider that they can help really well. The anti-transpirants are a clear, like kind of waxy material that we spray onto the leaves. This is going to help during those times of excessive heat when that plant wants to close its stomata. We're actually covering those leaves, preventing those stomatas from closing because it's locking in that moisture, prevents that evapotranspiration so that plant can stay hydrated and still photosynthesize. So this is really important. The anti-transpirants are also really good during times of frost, preventing those plants from any of the plant tissue from getting frostburn. And it's a lot. We're almost done.
Almost done. A
Yeah.
couple more slides for you all, but we get to now talk about plant selection, the fun part when we go to the nursery. So when we are thinking about this changing climate, we want to understand, one, we already live in kind of a weird climate. California is a little weird, especially at least compared to the rest of the country or most parts of the country, the Midwest, the Northeast, where we have those, hot summers, dry summers, and mild winters. So we're already a little weird and we're getting weirder. So we want to choose, but on that note, California natives, plants that are going to be suited to our climate are going to be more adapted to these changes. They still accept water, like water in the winter, and they can handle long periods of dry. Of course, with our help with irrigation. So choosing those California natives and also similarly the Mediterranean plants, those are both varieties that are going to do better in our climate. And then if you are choosing, ask the nursery staff about, if there's pest or disease resistant varieties, because that will always, that will potentially make your life that much easier if at least you're putting in a plant that's going to be pest or disease resistant. We don't have to worry about that, at least, hopefully. And then some other things to think about when we are selecting plants. We're going to do our homework in our yard, understand what our yard conditions are, our garden's conditions are, and make sure we're choosing plants that we're going to do well in those conditions. Do you have a shady area? Do you have a windy area? Do you have a hot area against a fence? All those things will need to be taken into consideration when you are choosing plants to go there. Because when a plant is matched to the conditions, it's going to do so much better. It's going to grow faster, it's going to grow better, and it's going to be less stressed and have fewer pests. We also want to understand the mature size of the plant. How big is it going to get? We don't want to stick, a big shrub into a little tiny plant size like this. Even though maybe it only comes in a 4-inch pot now, it's going to grow to 3 feet wide. So we want to make sure it has the room to grow. And I know it's going to look a little sparse in the garden in the short term, but just know that in 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years, that plant is going to be healthier because you gave it room to grow and it's going to grow much faster. On that note, we really do want to avoid overcrowding because overcrowding of plants can invite pest problems and stress on the plant. Not all, I mean, sometimes you can see on this picture, there's lots of crowded plants together. So sometimes they work together, but too many in the wrong size space could cause a lot of stress. And then lastly, we are going to group plants by the plant's water needs and sun needs and other environmental needs once established. So a plant might be drought tolerant when established, but in the moment, it's going to need a little bit more water. So you can, when you first put it in the ground, so you're still going to want to plant it with those other drought tolerant, low water use plants, but you're not going to water the whole area as much because of you put in one plant. You're just going to, target that one plant with a little watering can or a hose and make sure that one's getting more water and then taper it off. as the plant grows. But overall, we're going to match it to the general needs of the plants around it. And then consider, some lawn substitutes. You don't have to get rid of your lawn. You don't have to mulch it over or put gravel down. There's a lot of alternative ways to still have a beautiful lawn, or have just a smaller lawn, or a different kind of lawn. And it can still be, beautiful and functional. There's a lot of native grasses that are going to do really well and have deep root systems if watered correctly, and then they can withstand, long periods of drought or low or like heat and low water, with less water usage. The diamondia on the bottom left is like, I don't know what kind of it is, but it's very squishy and pretty, and it can spread really. It's not a succulent, but it's something else. I'm sorry. But it can really cover an area beautifully and nice to walk on. Or you can choose something like creeping thyme, which really spreads nicely, very low water use, and the flowers are not only beautiful, but they support pollinators. And then speaking of pollinators, we want to, when we're choosing plants, think of the ecosystem around us. Some plants are food for most plants are food for insects and birds. We want to support, pollinators, of course, but we also want to support food for birds, which can be pollinators. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but basically, we want to provide food for everything that will come into our garden, because if we have birds, if we have caterpillars, if we have moths, we have ladybugs, we have bees of all sorts, syrphid flies, we're going to create balance in our garden, and our plants are going to be healthier, and we're going to have fewer pests. And then we can also look at very specific organisms that we want to invite into our yard, those that do pest management for us, our natural enemies. Ladybugs, probably the most common one, but then of course, parasitic wasps, green lacewings, syrphid flies. We bring in those, and by bring in, I mean invite them in, with different plants that support them. We're going to have way less pests. And so we're going to plant insectoid plants that invite in those ladybugs and green lacewings, etc. So two kinds of shapes of flowers we're going to focus on. Flowers that look like daisies or sunflowers. So aster, coreopsis, cosmos, echinacea, and then flowers that grow in clusters of teeny flowers. I can speak from personal experience. Yarrow is an amazing way to attract ladybugs to the garden. I have never released ladybugs, store-bought ladybugs in my garden. But I have tons of ladybugs in my garden, but I also have yarrow, and it also grows like a weed. So it's really full, easy growing, doesn't need a lot of water, beautiful flowers too. And then of course you can also go for mint, parsley, lavender, ceanothus, lots of flowers, kinds of plants that have clusters of tiny flowers. And then if we want to grow food, we want to consider, well, I would say before we go for the food, we want to consider our water availability. This year we have a fair amount of water, so we're pretty in good shape. But going forward, if there's less rain in the winter, we might want to consider maybe not growing food or growing a smaller veggie garden. Veggie gardens are more thirsty than our perennials and our natives. So, and again, we do want to be focusing on those trees too in times of less water. So consider that before you put in your veggie garden, or consider at least the size. But then if you want to grow veggies, consider growing heirloom varieties. There's some that are going to be more specific for our California climate, even depending on what side of the county you live in. And then many of them can be more drought tolerant and use less water. And then lastly, we're going to talk about keeping water on site. Now, I talked about keeping water on site in the soil before when we were talking about growing healthy soil, but there, of course, are other ways that we can take advantage of any rainfall that comes onto our property. And when we think about water, what we want to do is slow it, spread it, sink it, and store it. We're slowing the runoff so it's not pulling, material and soil into the waterway, the storm drain. Sorry, water does not do any good for us when it goes into the storm drain. We want to spread it so it can move into our gardens. We want to sink it back into the ground and store it for the future. So there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can, focus on trees. Trees hold lots of water into the soil. Rain gardens, we'll talk about a little bit about those. Our disconnected downspouts, rain barrels, and adding pervious surfaces. All these are going to lead to a healthier garden, replenishing the water in the soil, reducing the needs of our municipal water, and prevents flooding and pollution. That's a big thing. I like to reiterate that. It's not so much about, I mean, it is about capturing water for use in the garden, but so much of this and what we're talking about is about reducing flooding, which can cause so much damage. So we're going to capture rainwater. We don't have to have these gigantic cisterns right off the bat. We can start small with a couple of barrels or one barrel and see how fast it fills. It's going to fill fast when it does rain because 1 inch of rain over a surface that's about 100,000 square feet can collect 600 gallons of water. So that's like one decent rainstorm on a medium-sized house, or not even kind of a small house, actually. So think about your roof and how much water you could potentially capture. And there's rain barrels come in lots of different sizes and shapes. So again, there's like the 50, 60-gallon ones that you can daisy chain together. They have the flat-ish ones that can go up against your walls. And then, of course, the gigantic cisterns that yeah, I don't even know where you'd keep with those. And then I mentioned rain gardens. So there's a lot more information online about building a rain garden, but if you're so interested in it, I'm just going to pique your interest now. Rain gardens are really like creating a creek bed or a creek bed in your property that just diverts water that comes off of the downspout and kind of moves it through slowly, slows it down, spreads it out, and moves it through like a little creek bed so that if it does reach um, so maybe no water left will reach the street or the storm drain. Ideally, it will come off of your roof on your downspout, move through this little creek bed, fill it up a little bit. It's not a deep creek. We're not making a pond. We're just making maybe a couple inch deep depression, and it can be either it can be just like a basin, or it could be more of like a lined creek bed, however you want to create it. And it just kind of spreads that water, makes it pool up a little bit, and then allows it to sink slowly into that soil. And also you want to add plants to it because of course it's prettier and it will help that soil absorb the water better. And there are wonderful native plants that can, again, withstand the kind of weird conditions of being really dry, but then having a lot of water on them all at once. The yarrow again, the buckwheat, the California fuchsia, the poppy, lots of beautiful options for rain gardens. And then lastly, we are going to increase permeable surfaces. So we've focused on the garden the whole time. Now we're going to focus on our hardscaping. And the more we can break up concrete and create permeable surfaces is going to help our garden and, of course, reduce flooding. So if water can infiltrate gravel or decompose granite or brick, it will sink down into the soil, absorbed into the soil, and still all that water will be available to plants longer over time. And then of course we're not, rushing, that water's not rushing off into the street again. And then, so thank you for sticking it out with us. That was a lot of information. You'll be able to review this later, but some resources to follow up on. We have the Our Water, Our World website. We have the UC IPM website, which is an amazing resource for any kind of pest problem. We have bugguide.net. It's kind of a fun place to go if you're curious about bugs in the garden. Take a picture and then go on the website and see if you can figure out what it is, or you can send it in to an expert. And then the NPIC National Pesticide Information Center is a great resource when learning about pesticides. If you're choosing a pesticide, you want to use one for your garden, you can go to this website and kind of understand any risks to yourself, to children, to the soil, to the waterways, before you spray. And that will be all from us, but we are here for your questions, even though it's been a little bit late. We're here for your questions. And again, a thank you to the Clean Water Program of Alameda for having us today. Thank you for sharing this evening with us. And yeah, we're here for questions. Thank you.